right, so thank you all very much for joining me today. Let's go into screen share mode. And today's webinar is about assessing grammar. Okay. Both of our favorite topics, teaching grammar and then assessing grammar. This is our second webinar of the year. We have a few more coming up. And today's webinar is sponsored by Vialingua. Right here, for you, if you want to check it out. It's an organization that helps students become teachers and learn how to teach English as a foreign language. And it also helps them with employment opportunities for their career. So if you are interested, or if you have students who are interested in teaching English abroad, this is a good organization to check, and they are sponsoring us today. So thank you very much, Vialingua. All right, so we cannot start talking about assessing grammar if we don't talk about what grammar is, right? So before I start talking, can you give me some ideas of how you would define grammar? Not a dictionary definition, or how would you explain to your students, okay, we're going to study grammar. So we're going to study. Any ideas?
Well, I can start by I'll just give a little explanation that I often give in a MA TESOL class that I teach. I like to say that grammar is very measurable, it's very teachable, it's very learnable, and it's the structure of language, but it is not language, and we need to remember that. Grammar itself is not language.
And why is that?
It's a structure for language, for any language.
So is it enough to just know the structure?
No, and that's what I mean by it's not language. And if we're teaching language or testing language, we have to keep in mind what it is we're teaching and testing. So while it's important, it itself is not language. And I think it's very easy to forget that and think that when we're teaching grammar, we're teaching language. But I like to separate those two.
I'm actually going to incorporate those two in the presentation. So thank you very much, Michael. That's great. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about incorporating, making grammar language. Elena, go ahead.
I would like to add to this idea. I agree, and I always remind my students of the fact that if they know grammar rules, it doesn't mean that they can apply them correctly in their speaking and writing. And that's why grammar books can probably work at some beginner levels, but then you need something more. And it can be easily demonstrated when you show the students who say, oh, I know that, I know the structure, I know how it works. And then you start this discussion with on their work, especially written work. I mean, both speaking and writing. You can see that, yeah, I actually know that, but I made a mistake. So it's just an addition to what Michael said.
Perfect. I have goosebumps because we're actually going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to use grammar, like how to make the connection, how to bridge the gap between actually applying the rule and using it in a context of speaking and writing and producing language correctly, accurately, but also appropriately to the context as well. Anybody else with what do you tell your students? We're going to study grammar. We're going to study the present perfect. We're going to study how to conjugate verb to be. I don't know. Right. So let's take a look here, and please feel free to jump in. So grammar, it is about the form of the language, but like Michael was saying, it's not language, right? It's mean and make sense. We need the rules, yes, but we need to be able to use these rules appropriately to be able to make meaning and to be able to make sense, not only of what others are telling us, but of what we are telling them, right? And how we are being perceived by what we say, right? By what grammatical structures we use. So let's take a look here. So if you are a skilled user of grammar in your language or in another language, You're going to express yourself accurately and meaningfully, right? But you're also going to use your knowledge of grammar to present yourself to others in the way that they wish to be seen. And I think this is something very important that we often do not touch when we're teaching grammar. How the choices that we make when it comes to grammatical structures affect how we are perceived by others and how they understand what we're trying to say. Because have you ever had a situation in which somebody is being completely accurate, grammatically accurate, the structure is perfectly fine, but it just doesn't fit the purpose, or it doesn't fit the context, or something else, this sounded a little rude. This could sound a little bit better. And is because of the structure that you chose to use, right? So I think it's very important that we touch in this aspect of, okay, yes, grammar is important to express yourself accurately and precisely and effectively, but it also has to do with a lot of with the perception of what people are perceiving when you're saying things, because of the choices that we make, right? Grammatical choices. So let me show you this here. It's February, so Valentine's month day here, or Valentine's month, I guess, and in the United States and in other countries. In Brazil, is celebrate Valentine's Day in February. We celebrate it in June. In February, it's too close to Carnival, so it wouldn't work. So take a look at these sentences here. We love you. This is a grammatically correct sentence, right? Is it correct? Yeah, right. And how about you are loved by us? Do you notice anything different in terms of how you're perceiving these sentences? If somebody told you, oh, we love you, honey, or we love you, or if we said in a car example, oh, you are loved, do you feel any difference? And I'm talking about feelings here. I'm not talking about the grammar itself. I'm talking about how you feel when you read or when somebody says these sentences to you. Do you feel anything different? Yes or no?
I think you could, because of the stress of the subject of the sentence, or the first word in this case, from the active and the passive that you're getting, who's important here. And we love you, although it is saying use important also, but it's starting with the we.
So which one would you say is stronger? We love you, or you are loved? Perry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I would say you are loved.
You think,
at least in my mind, is stronger.
you think it's a stronger, you're loved. But do they elicit different feelings in your head? Because sometimes, and let's think about when we teach the passive and the active voice, right? Is it enough to just say they mean the same thing? You just switch the position of the object becomes the subject. So the object of the active voice becomes the subject in the passive voice, right? Is it a direct correlation? Do they mean exactly the same thing?
No.
No, they don't, right?
It also depends on the situation.
Exactly.
Not
When
like-
would you say we love you, and when would you say you are loved, right? So let's keep going here. So grammar does play a key role in our ability to communicate precisely and effectively. And this is one thing that I want to go back to throughout the presentation, because I feel like a lot of teachers think that just grammar is not important, and it is important, but we need to take into consideration other things as well, like the context, the use, the perception of the users and of the person who's using or making choices grammatically, grammatical choices, right? And this is a very important point, because yes, there are patterns to be learned, right, in the structure, but there's also a great deal of choice in the way that users, especially native speakers, choose to deploy one or versus the other. So let's take a look at these sentences here. I was wondering if you could do me a favor. I was hoping you could help me with my homework. And students will see this, was wondering, was plus ing, and they think, oh, this is the past progressive, right? But is this really talking about an event that was going on in the past? It is not. We're using I was wondering and I was hoping here to socially distance ourselves to be a little bit more polite. So we're using the form of past progressive to be more polite and to socially distance ourselves as well. Now, how about this? Is there any difference? I want to know the time, but is there any difference if I say, do you have the time? What time is it? And please tell me the time. These are all different grammatical constructions here. I have a yes or no question. I have a WH question. I have an imperative sentence here. So I want to know the time. That's my goal, right? But how can I accomplish this goal of knowing what time it is? I have many choices in grammar. And how do I choose the best one, right? And I think that's the beauty of grammar. The beauty lies there. And we have to teach our students that there are so many choices, so many grammatical choices that we can make. But we have to make sure that we are choosing the correct grammatical choice for what we want to achieve, right? Let's keep going here. Tom gave Jenny flowers, and Tom gave flowers to Jenny, right? And when you have the direct object, you have two direct objects, and here you have a direct and indirect object, right? And so does the order change anything in what you're trying to convey in terms of meaning, right? The action is the same. Jenny received flowers from Tom, right? But is there any difference between choosing to say Tom gave Jenny flowers and Tom gave flowers to Jenny, right? How about it was decided that he would be fired, using the passive voice here with the it as a subject, right? As opposed to he was fired, or as opposed to we fired him, right? So the meaning is the action is the same, he was fired, right? But the way we are using, the way we are saying certain things, it may be, oh, we want to admit who fired him, or we want to take responsibility for firing him, right? So they don't really mean exactly the same thing. So it's very important that when we're teaching grammar to our students, that we look into the nuances of language, right? And I think that makes grammar so much more interesting if we look at it that way. And if we're looking at it that way, we're also thinking about how we are going to test, because we cannot teach one way and then test another way, right? Let me give you another example here. And I want to know what you think about this one. So whenever you teach simple present, habit, right, we usually say, if you use the adverb of frequency always, right, you want to use the simple present. But now here I'm using the present progressive with the adverb of frequency always. Is this an ungrammatical sentence? Would you catch yourselves saying this sentence?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just you need to explain that it has a negative connotation. And
Exactly, it's the negative connotation there. It's like kind of like you're complaining, right?
right.
So
right.
it's very different if I said John always loses his keys as a statement of fact or a habit, or happens routinely, versus using the present progressive with the adverb of frequency always, right? So if I'm using the adverb of frequency always with the present progressive, it has a negative connotation. So if we just tell our students there's a blanket rule, if you use the adverb of frequency always with a simple present, it's a routine, and then they hear this, what are they going to understand, right? And so I think this is something very important. When you're teaching the simple present and it's the present progressive, it's important to teach these things as well and test them. Because if all students have is a steady diet of mechanical drills and just rules and rules and rules, right? Then they're often at a loss when they are in a situation that calls for them to communicate, right? They cannot activate the forms that are appropriate for the context. And like Michael was saying, it's the language, right? We need to teach them the language. Teaching them just the rules is not the language, right? People say he's always doing this, right? And that's how language is used. So we need to marry these things when we're teaching and talking about grammar, right? So Larson Freeman has this really good framework that I think is very important for teaching and testing, which incorporates not only the form, because students need to know the form to be accurate, right? How to conjugate a verb, or which verbs need a preposition, which preposition goes with what, right? But they also need to know the meaning of that particular structure and how it is used, the context where it is used. And usually grammar tests only focus on the form and the structure part of the pie here, right? And that shouldn't be the case. We should be teaching and testing our students in all these three dimensions, because that's language, right? That's not just grammar, it's language, how you use language. So here. So the students need to understand that the choices that we make, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about it in the next webinar about vocabulary choices and grammatical choices, right? They affect how we say things, right? And how others understand and perceive it, what we say. And I feel like a lot of the times, second language speakers don't realize the power that grammar has when they're trying to sound more polite, or when they are trying to sound, or when they are trying to be more assertive, right? Or if they really want to be rude on purpose, right? So I always tell my students this, like, if I'm teaching them grammar, I'm teaching them grammar with pragmatics, right? Like, I don't want you to be polite at all times. I want you to know how you can be rude in the second language too, or how you can be more subjective, or how you can be more objective, right? And grammar helps a lot with that, understanding grammar, right? So we need to teach and test integrating all of these dimensions, right? And not just the accuracy part. Because testing only grammatical accuracy and teaching is severely limiting, right? It's doing the students a disservice, I think, right? Because they will not be able to apply that, like Irina was saying in the beginning, right? Oh, I knew that, I knew this form, but why didn't I not use it correctly here, right? So I think that's very important. And I think this, I'll give you a minute to read this quote here. That's what we were saying too in the beginning, right? Is that your experience as well? Halliday, yes, Sam, excellent. Like Diane White Erskine, I love her too, and she is also always referring to Halliday as well when she's talking about and making this framework, right? And so we want our students to be able to understand that grammar is part of the language, but just knowing the rules is not enough, right? Because then you're not going to be able to communicate. You're not going to be able to use language precisely, effectively, and in your favor, right? The language is doing what you want it to do. Because in our first languages, we know exactly how to manipulate language to say exactly what we want it to. Not only grammatical choices, but also vocabulary choices and intonation choices. We know how to do that precisely. But we need to be able to teach our students to do that as well in their second language, right? And grammar is a big part of it. So we need to help them fly and actually use language, right? So let's talk now let's get into assessing grammar. But before we get there, any thoughts that you would like to share at this point? We're going to move on to actually creating tests now and talking about the assessment part itself. I was covering a little bit about what grammar is, because we also have to think about how we define language and what role grammar plays within that definition of language, because that will affect how you teach and how you test, the constructs that you're going to be testing, and what you're going to be teaching, right? It needs to match. So any thoughts at this point, Stan?
Oh, I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to pipe in to say it's such a pleasure to listen to like-minded people with similar perspectives who are thinking about similar questions and with similar experiences. So happy.
Yeah, that's good, because I feel it's so boring to just teach, oh, simple present, you use this, it's simple present progressive, for and actually that is repeating, that there's so much more. And students, and actually I started thinking a lot more about grammar when I had to teach the same topics to more advanced students. And I'm like, how can I make this more interesting? How can I go beyond just teaching do and does, like how can I make this more meaningful to them, right? Let's go back here to assessing grammar now. So let's include tasks in our grammar tests that challenge students to understand the situation and decide which grammar form is the best within the given context, right? Let's go beyond memorizing rules, memorizing the form. Yes, the form is important. We need to know how to accurately form the language, but we need to go beyond that, right? So we need to look at the form and the meaning, the literal and the unintended meanings as well, and their grammatical ability to use the language. And we can have them do that by recognition, by producing language, and by performing the language, right? So designing grammar tests. We have to be very careful in all kinds of assessments that we create to include a variety of tasks, right? They're asking students to do different things and the way that they can show best what they learned, right? So in a grammar test, and we're going to see different types of tests later, but you want to have a mix of selected response tasks with constructive response tasks. Everybody familiar with both terms, selected and constructed response? Right, like a multiple choice would be select response, right? And constructive response ones that they produce the language, right? And there's various levels of how much production you want to ask them to do. You want to have a mix of personal and meaningful contextualized tasks as well. And I'll give you lots of examples of things that I created. Like, I want to make this more interesting for me too, because grammar tests can also be very boring for the teacher when they're grading. You're like, oh, I can see this passive voice like 1,000 times. He ate the cake was eaten by him. No, like let's make this interesting, right? And I ask a lot of personal questions in my tests as well. Not super personal, but personal. But sometimes I have to be careful because I've asked questions that are like, I was not expecting this type of response here. That maybe this question was too personal, right? Sorry. I always start with easier tasks because usually students can be afraid of grammar, right? And so I always start with a select response type of task. I never start with a constructive response. And I always start with easier tasks to ease them into the test itself. Clear directions. I write the final total points up at the top, and I also write for each question, how many points each question is worth. And I always take my own test before administering it to students. I don't do that all the time with other types of tests, but with grammar tests, I always do, because there's always something that I missed. And even so, there's always that student that will give me an answer that I'm like, oh gosh, I did not think of this answer. This answer is also possible here. And so I am always prepared to edit my own answer key based on what this student, and there's always one that will come up with a different response, like, oh, this tense works here too. Right, this could also be used. It would mean something a little bit different, but it works in this case. And so always take your test and always be prepared to edit or revise, and don't be just very mechanical, because sometimes with grammar tests, it can be very mechanical with grading, right? And very automated. Don't do that. Think about it and have tests that make your students think, because that's the purpose, right? And I love when they think way outside the box and they come up with something like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that. And then I bring the test the next day, like, this person, like, he thought of something that I had not thought about it. And they like it because then they are manipulating, using the language, right? And they're understanding the rules. So there are many different types of tasks that we can have. So in terms of selected response types of tasks, limited production and extended production. And I have many different tasks here that I want to share with you, tasks that I've created based on books that I've used as resources and some things that came out of my own mind. And I want to talk about those. So I'm going to give you examples of these tasks as we go. And in the article, in the book chapters that I sent you, as well as resources for this, you can see some examples of different types of tasks that go beyond that just very simple, I don't know, like fill in the blank type of exercise that we love to do with grammar, you know, like, oh, you give the verb in parentheses and they have to complete the verb. Okay. And we also have to think in terms of what tasks are more communicative and which tasks are less communicative, right? Here are other examples of types of tasks too that we can use in our grammar assessments. Okay? And I think we should have a mix of those tasks, right? You want to have more communicative and you want to have less communicative tasks as well. And then we also, of course, have to think about scoring, right? Because not everything is created or graded the same, should be graded the same. So tasks that require constructed responses and are more communicative, they should be worth more. The students are producing the language, right? If they are harder because of what they're asking students to do. So for example, if you have multiple choice, this is just random numbers that I assigned here, right? They can be worth 0.5, but if they're worth 0.5, a multiple choice, then a gap filling exercise should not be worth 0.5 as well. They should be worth a little bit more, right? They're both limited production or they're no selected response, but in terms of how much it's requiring the student to do and to know, it's different. So we have to keep that in mind when we are weighing our portions of the test, right? So for sentences, for example, if they're actually being required to write a sentence, I usually have 2, 1, 0, right? Each sentence is worth 2 points. So 2 is a perfect sentence. 1 is a satisfactory sentence with a minor error. 0 is an unsatisfactory sentence, and you can modify that based on what grammatical structure you're teaching, right? Sometimes I will give a 2 for a perfect sentence, even though the sentence is not completely perfect. Like they have an error in a preposition, but the preposition is not the topic that we're studying. Other than that, everything is fine. The tense is fine, and so I still consider that a perfect sentence. So you have to have that very clear to yourself, right? And then use rubrics for more productive response type. And have you considered this, that the total weight of constructed tests should be higher than the weight of selected tests? And I want to hear your opinion on this. Do you agree with me or not on this one? Production tasks should be weighted higher than, like the overall points should be higher than the selected response. Do you agree? What are your thoughts on this? Let's see, somebody wrote something in the chat. Okay, you agree with me? Yes? Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking it over. I mean, in the first part where you say that, you know, the individual items that are productive should weigh more, that without a doubt. But when we talk about should the entire portion of the test with constructed task be given a higher value than the selected, I'm thinking it over because it depends on what the test looks like, and to some degree it depends on what you're testing, because I find that sometimes, depending on the grammar point, it's easier with some grammar points, it's easier to create selected response items than constructed response items. And in that case, so I prefer I prefer a lot of constructed response, but I think there was a test, I'm sorry, I can't remember the point, but there was a few months ago, I was constructing a set of new grammar tests, and there was one test particularly where it just didn't, the particular point that we were looking at just didn't lend itself to a lot of good constructed response. So in that case, I made the test almost entirely selected response. But generally, yes. Generally, I would agree with that.
So that's how I think too. I generally try to do that, have more weight on the productive response text, but it also depends on the type of test that I'm giving. If it's just a quiz, sometimes I just like a formative quiz or something that's not worth very much out of the overall grade too. I'm giving more selective response type of questions, and that it's impossible, right? So I guess it also depends on the situation, on the context of the test, right? But definitely, I always follow this in terms of select response should always be worth less. The item should always be worth less than the productive response, right? And then in the Brown Bakerama book chapter that I sent to you, they have this sample rubric for assessing syntactic knowledge that you can adapt to depending to the task that you're giving the students to do, right? That was interesting. It's a development of like the 210 for the sentence one, and you can use this to grade more complex tasks, right? So let's get creative. This is gonna be my favorite part here. So I'm gonna show you some tasks that I created for both quizzes and tests, and also for in-class exercise. So it's a mix of both, but I think that all could be given in a test, right? But I want sometimes I gave the points, and sometimes I took out the points, so we could discuss how many points you think this would be worth. This would be a good test. This would not be a good test. Give me feedback as well as you see those questions. Okay. So let's start with the multiple choice tests that are in the Brown and the Bakerama chapter. So this is not me. This is them. And so I like the distinction that they make when they're talking about, okay, this type of test is a multiple choice, but it's only focusing on the grammatical form. Why? Because all the options here, it's not essential for the student to understand the context. So it's only focusing on the grammatical form, right? And so I think that's something that we need to keep in mind when we are creating tests. And I think they're super hard to create, actually, to create good multiple choice tests. Because we have to be thinking, okay, is this task only targeting the form, or is it task targeting both, or only targeting meaning? And then have a balance of that as well in your tests, right? So this one is just focusing on the grammatical form because the students it's not essential to understand the context. But for this one here, they need to understand the context and the meaning, because all of these options would be okay here. Do you have plans for tonight? Not really. How about you? Need any help? How about a movie? Need to work? But they need to keep reading in order to make sense and choose the correct answer, right? And then you can see here, there's another topic that I love talking about, it's spoken grammar too. That's another thing that can generate a lot of good discussion too. Like, are we testing spoken grammar too on a test, right? As opposed like, do you need any help or need any help, right? So here they need to understand the context, right? And so
Sorry,
it's not only, oh, go ahead.
Can I just, I'm just wondering what grammatical point are we testing here?
Questions.
But yeah, but how is it? I guess what I'm asking is, how is it grammar? These are more like lexical chunks, really. I mean, I'm not sure how this is testing a grammar point, I guess.
Well, what they were saying is testing how to make questions. So in a more contextualized way.
Okay.
Yeah. But I agree, these are more chunks, right? And that's why I'm talking here about spoken grammar as well, right? As opposed to actually saying, do you need any help or need any help? And then here is testing both grammatical form and meaning, in which that they have to think that they have to understand that this present progressive here is being used to talk about the future. And then there is an uncertainty aspect to it here. And so, and choose the correct form C to complete the dialogue, right? And another example of exercises that focuses on form and meaning. This used to be a TOEFL exercise a long time ago, the paper-based TOEFL, right? If you're familiar with it, choose the option that is wrong, right? So they would have to choose B here because it's the simple present that should be used for daily activities and routines, right? So there is a place for this type of exercise. I'm not a huge fan of this one, but I guess there is a place for it, right? But I like these types of exercises better. And if you've taught with the Blue Grammar book by Azar, you've probably seen something very similar to this. And I usually use students' names here. So the teacher had already given a quiz when Leo got to class, and the teacher was giving a quiz when Samantha got to class. Who missed the quiz entirely? Leo or Samantha? Nobody? Because you're afraid of grammar? So who missed the quiz? Who did not see the quiz?
Lou.
Who? Exactly, right? When Samantha got to class, the quiz was still in progress, right? How about, let's do the other one. Yuko has had a busy day so far. She's been doing homework all day. John has had a busy day so far. He's done his homework assignments and he's practiced his presentation. Now he's catching up with the news. Who has already finished studying?
John.
John, right? How about this one? Faisal wore braces for 4 years. Jack has worn braces since he was 10. Mike has been wearing braces since 2018. Who still wears braces?
Mike.
Just Mike?
Both?
Mike and Jack.
And Jack.
Right?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry, three. I mean, sorry.
So Mike and Jack. And of course, if I use something like this on a test, that's not the first time the students are seeing it, right? I give this exercise to them in class as well, so that they are familiar with the type of test, right? But I like those because it makes them think, and they think, and I love these ones that can be both. But of course, I do that in classes also. They know that they can be more than one possibility, right? But then here you're seeing the difference between the simple past, the present perfect, and the present perfect progressive with a verb that makes no distinction of the continuing state of it, no matter if you use the present perfect or the present perfect progressive, which is different from has done and has been doing, which in this case here has a very distinct meaning, right? Finished and not finished. How about this one? What do you think of this task? You see, my examples are very personal. So
Well,
which
B is ungrammatical,
uh-huh.
and in between C and D, it's C is ungrammatical.
C is ungrammatical. So what do you think of this type of task? What is it asking students to do here?
Well, they pretty much have to analyze the situation. They look at the form, of course. They are, in this case, it's verb forms, but they actually have to connect this form to the, I mean, it's still a context here, although it's just only within one sentence, we can see the context, the situation. So they have to actually remember the rule and apply it to a situation. And it's good that there are two sentences, they have a choice to think what is correct. So it's a little bit of a content and the situation
So
might help.
I would add that the also it's helpful, interesting, useful that the context is expressed across more than one clause or sentence. So they have to process all of that. That helps to create the context, and it also has to be an analytical target for them to understand all of it.
And you can see here that everything else, the other clauses are exactly the same. So these type of exercises are kind of hard to create because you have to come up with situations that where you can write exactly the same thing, but then just change one part of the sentence. And so this is really focusing their attention on the form here of the present perfect progressive versus the past perfect progressive, but they have to keep looking to see what the context is. Is this in the past, this is done, this is not done, this is still going, right? So this is something that I like doing with them to make them really pay attention to how to use which and when to use which form, right? There are some types of discrimination tasks. This is one example from the Brown and Abeku-Rama chapter, in which the response could be either language or non-language, and I like that too, just to have a variety and like add some spice to the test as well, right? And of course, it can also help younger, less proficiency learners as well, right? So especially when you're trying to discriminate between very similar sentences or structure or grammatical forms, in this case, like the pronouns, right? So which one would you choose to deliver it to him? Is it A or B? I don't like this picture very much, but
I think it could be either one.
it could be, yeah, because the picture is not very,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. But the idea is to make exercises, let me see if this one is a little bit better, that can discriminate between very similar structures. So what do you think about this? Why are you wearing jeans as opposed to why do you wear jeans? Which one is a habit? Which one is an action happening at the moment of speaking? Why are you being so rude versus why are you so rude? Which one is a temporary behavior? Which one is a personality trait, right? And what are you doing on Halloween versus what do you do on Halloween? One specific Halloween, the forthcoming one, or Halloween each year, right? So they have to discriminate between the uses of the simple present and the present progressive here in sentences like, and you can see here, everything else is the same. The only thing that changes is the verb tense and the aspect, right? What do you think of this exercise?
Good.
All right.
Yeah, one thing about that one I don't care for as much is the fact that on the right side, the temporary behavior personality trait, it takes kind of, I think, a high level of language to know that vocabulary about traits and temporary. It would be hard for like a kind of a non-advanced learner to be able to get those. Sometimes I've run into issues with this. I had one instructor who was making tests, but she always asked students to, she would use, like, say, for example, the name of the, like, the tense, and ask students to write using the tense. And I always felt like that's asking them to memorize or to use something else that's not giving us the information we really need. But yeah, I do like the activity otherwise, though.
That's a very valid point. And I wouldn't do this with, remember when I said, oh, I was trying to make this more interesting, the simple present and present progressive, when I was trying to review with my more advanced students? That's how I made it more interesting, because I was tired of just teaching like the question word order, or just like, oh, simple present is for this, present progressive is for this. So yes, definitely I use this with more advanced learners, because we have to be careful with the exercise and in all types of tests and tasks that we create. We have to be careful that the language itself in the exercise does not prohibit students from doing the exercise in the first place, right? So we have to be very careful with that. That's a very valid point.
With Erica, even the use of Halloween, which
Mhm.
is
Culture,
yeah.
right? Definitely. There's another type of task in the Brown and Abeku-Rama chapter, and they would have to notice when would is being used to talk about the habitual past, right? And when it is used to talk about the present or the future. So we would even do it when it snowed. This is habitual past. Now I wouldn't change those days. This is referring to the present. So students have to notice within a bigger context when it refers to the past and when it refers to the present or the future, right? It's much easier, I feel like, for students to understand when they see things in context, as opposed to just like giving them one sentence and that's it, right? How about this exercise? What do you think of this exercise? Let's look at number 2. Mary sells makeup and Mary is selling makeup. Do they express the same meaning?
I would say one is a more temporary state,
Which one?
the B. So it's
Mhm.
something she might be just doing for now.
Yeah, it's like, is she broke? She's selling her makeup or whatever.
Or she's just doing that as a gig for now, you know,
Right, it's just like
something.
an additional kind of income.
Exactly. And so what do you think of this type of test in classes, always in class first and then on a test? But what do you think? Is it having students think about both the form and the meaning and the use of the grammatical forms?
I have actually a question, like this test, would it be given to our intermediate level or advanced students, or it can be given to any proficiency level students?
I think you can do it with any proficiency level students, as long as you look at the types of language, the language that you're using, right? Make sure the students know the vocabulary, and make sure students have practiced this a lot with just that structure. So for example, if I were teaching a lower level class and doing some kind of exercise like this, I would not mix present perfect with present perfect progressive and a simple present with present progressive, past perfect and present. So I would do like one exercise, just contrasting simple present and present progressive, which was what they're studying. So I think it can be adapted to all levels, but you have to be very careful with how you're preparing the exercise, right? Remember when I said about making tasks more personalized, right? So instead of just giving them a blank, fill in the blank type of exercise, I wanted them to tell me what is true for them. So, and they could write in the negative form too. So here I was expecting them to tell me, oh, I have lived, or I've been living in Tucson for this many years or this many months, right? They could say, I didn't study for this quiz, or I studied for this quiz, and they do that. They are very honest, right? Sorry. And then here, Penny has not talked much today, or they could also say didn't talk much today if it's like the end of the class and this is what I'm giving, so they can tell. I would accept both options, right? I have eaten a lot this week, or I didn't eat a lot this week. It depends on when I'm giving the test, so I have to keep these things in mind, right? And then I accept lots of different answers because I want them to play with grammar. I want them to tell me what they want to tell me, right? And I tried to make sentences that I could tell if it was true or not for them. So that if they wrote something that was completely unacceptable, that I could mark it wrong, but that was a little bit tricky. So I tried to do that, but then I don't know, for example, whether they have been to Phoenix twice this year or not. So they would have to say here, I've been to Phoenix twice this year. I haven't been to Phoenix twice this year. But if they say, I won't go, I won't be, no, they wouldn't be able to say I won't. So if they said, for example, I won't be to Phoenix twice this year, then that would be considered wrong because they have to analyze the entire sentence, right? In the chapter that I sent to you, there is another example of completing the dialogue, so that's more contextualized as well. And here is an example of a task that I had to complete the sentences with the appropriate form. So giving them a little bit more creative power in the test as well. And we're practicing count and non-count nouns. So instead of just giving them an exercise to complete, fill in the blank, like the regular type of exercise, I want them to tell me, give me good sentences, right? What do you think? That people in America have too much what, right? People in America have too much money. People in America have too much patience. People in America, I don't know. People in my country have too many naps. You know, I don't know. So I want them to come up with a noun, a count, or like paying attention to too much, too many, to the quantifier here to give me good sentences. And it's also fun for me to read too. It's not just like the one correct answer, right?
Right.
Karen, you unmuted yourself, and Stan.
Hey, Tani, could I say sometimes when I introduce this to fairly new language learners, they sometimes need to be liberated to actually be able to create meaning there. So I would often get things like people in America have too much people, or people in my country. So, where they don't get it, that they're being asked to create meaning, and they think it's a form exercise. So I have spent time in lower level grammar classes just trying to liberate them to the point where they understand what this task is.
Yes, because they're so used to this one particular type of task that is only focusing on form, right? And so that we have to teach them, okay, no, we're talking about meaning here, so it has to make sense, right? You need to make sense in the language, right?
But also, I was just thinking, like our advanced level students make mistakes in, this particular structure, a lot of, great deal, very much. And I'm thinking using like this as an exercise and probably a warm-up, putting these expressions on the board and give them the sentence and come up immediately, like, like a warm-up speaking exercise in the beginning of class, just to remind them.
Yeah,
that
definitely
might be like an option, because it's very quick and people can have actually a lot of fun with that.
Exactly. And you can have a lot of fun too. Like, I love grading those types of tasks because I'm like, oh, this is funny. And then I usually make comments on the side too, and say, I agree or I disagree or something like that. Or in my country, people are like that too, or something, right? Other types of tasks that I like to do with them is imagine, right? Oops, sorry. That you wanted to, well, would you respond, right? Your friend asks you, why didn't you text me back? And then you have to come up with a response, right? And you use the appropriate tense to respond. Were you taking a nap when I called you yesterday? Yeah, so I was taking a nap. Oh no, I was doing this, right? So you're gonna see that they're gonna use the correct tense by responding to an authentic situation, right? Your classmate asks you, where did you buy those shoes? They're really cool. And something that I always see in my classes, whatever class that I'm teaching, is that I feel like a lot of times these students know how to take the grammar test and like answer correctly, but when they're talking to people, they're using grammar all over the place, and so I feel like using those type of situations will help them. Okay, oh, if somebody actually asked me this, then maybe I said something wrong the other day. I said this. They told me that they've done that, and I definitely noticed this in class. When they're talking, their grammar is usually all over the place, right? They're very fluent sometimes, but the grammar is crazy. Or something like this too. Now you make the question. You want to know what your friend thinks about Tucson. What do you ask? You want to know if your friend is having fun here. What do you ask them, right? You want to know what your friend is thinking about right now because he or she looks worried. What do you ask? So the other one, they were talking to somebody, engaging conversation, and here they were asking the question, right? So it's a way to test their question-making ability without just putting the words like, oh, scramble the words there and then unscramble the words and make a sentence, right? All right. And then with more extended production, answer the question below with as many details as possible. So I want them to explain, like talk to me a little bit more, and then just like one sentence, right? And you see these are all very personal. So I want them to engage with the language. I want them to communicate something meaningful to me, as opposed to just randomly answering grammar textbooks about random people, right? No, I want to know about you. I want to know you. And then another exercise that I've done, I haven't done this in a test like this, but this could, when I was preparing this presentation, this is something that you can have a speaking test, a speaking grammar test, right? So you have your students interview you, and you can judge whether they're asking questions correctly, or whatever topic you're teaching them, right? So in this case here, you want to know more about me. So we want to engage in conversation, and they have to ask me, how many years have you been teaching English? How many classes do you have this session, right? All right. We're almost done here. I know we have 1 minute left. And then another thing like this, and then maybe do a pair work type of test for them to do on a test, like an exercise instead of just individual tests. In which situation, which scenario you do have for each sentence? What is, and then to look at the gerund and the infinitive here. I stopped to help him versus I stopped helping him. So by the scenario that they described to me, then they will tell me, I will be able to see whether they know the difference between I stopped to help him, so I stopped what I was doing to go help him, or I stopped helping him, like, he asked me too many questions, like, I'm done, he never helped me, I stopped helping him. So by the scenario that they describe, then I will know whether they understood the grammatical form. So it's another way to tap into that knowledge, right? Another one here, personal, what you were encouraged or not encouraged to do when you were a kid, what you were expected to do, not expected to do when you were a kid. And then here I have them write an email to me and use the passive voice when they want to be polite, because I hate it when students tell me, teacher, you, like, I don't know, you didn't do this, or, I didn't get my homework or something. So you marked me absent. Like, yeah, right. So you were marked absent last Thursday, but you think that was a mistake because you were not absent on that day. So how do you convey that to your teacher using the passive voice and sounding more polite, right? I was marked absent, not you marked me absent, right? I was marked absent, but I think it was a mistake. I was not absent that day, so on and so forth. So we're trying to use the passive voice here to sound a little bit more polite, right? And just to finish up here, to wrap up, I always give them bonus questions, but not random bonus questions like what color was my shirt last week? No, right? Because I've seen some teachers do that. I give them bonus questions that are related to the topic. So I give them a cartoon. I choose a cartoon online. I delete what one person is saying, and I have them create the question for me. And so many people got this one wrong. So many people. It's like sometimes they're like, how long have you been standing there? Like, since Monday. She's been standing there since Monday, right? Sometimes I give a little bit more color. And you see here, today's it's Friday. So the question here more appropriate would be, how long have you been in London, or something like that, right? It always catches them, and that's why it's a bonus question, because it's a little bit of a tricky question. So I don't want to trick the students, but it's a bonus question for the ones who are really getting it, right? So I always do that. Or something like this, when we were studying adverb clauses, reduction of adverb clauses, right? While hiking through the woods yesterday, Ellen saw a bear. So who was hiking through the woods, Ellen or the bear? We have the reduced adverb clause here, right? But while walking through the woods, the bear spotted Ellen. So who was walking through the woods, Ellen or the bear, right? So I give them those like bonus questions, and they look forward to the bonus questions as well. Because who doesn't make mistakes, like stupid mistakes on a test, right? So I always like to have a bonus question just to help them. Oh, you made a stupid mistake. Yeah, but you did this bonus question, which is grammar, and it's related to the context, not just a random question. So you deserve that point. Irina?
And may I have a question regarding both questions. Do you actually explain the idea of a reduced adverb clause to students, or
yeah, this was the outcome. So this was the whole topic of the
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, all right. Thank you.
Sample test. I was going to share, but we were not going to have time. So this was today's webinar about grammar. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, talking about grammar and preparing this, and sharing some of my ideas with you. I would like to thank again the Society for allowing me to share these topics and ideas with you, and also Violingo for sponsoring today's webinar. Let me go ahead and stop sharing here. And I will make this presentation available if you're interested in looking at the sources, and you have the references as well that I sent you via email. All right, so let me stop recording here.